back on the Zero Hour. I, as always, am your host, Richard RJ Eskow. Something important, interesting, and kind of dramatic happened in West Virginia recently. I'll quote a few lines from The Intercept about it as let's see, who was the author here? Daniel, I got to put on my glasses now to get his last name. Boguslaw, I think is the last name, wrote that a grassroots slate of over 50 Democrats took control of the West Virginia Democratic Party after winning a majority of seats on the executive committee and ousting party leadership. Part of that whole shift was our very own Troy Miller, our executive producer, and we're going to learn more about that shift in this upcoming segment. Every old guard, and I'm going to quote The Intercept again, every old guard party apparatchik, save for the treasurer, is out of office, replaced with activists from across the Democratic spectrum, say, and again, I'm still quoting, set on revitalizing the state, flipping the script, blah, blah, blah. And I want to then quote one other thing about it. This Boguslaw fella describes how it says, for years prior to this month's landslide victory, social worker turned organizer Selina Vickers battled the state party through the DNC's adjudicative process, filing national challenges against the party's violations of both state code and DNC bylaws. It describes Selina Vickers' years-long struggle to get the party to play by the rules and how that eventually led to the party's acknowledging the justness of her cause and that leading to the results we got today. Well, joining us now is Selina Vickers. She's a lifelong resident of West Virginia. She's focused on reforming the West Virginia Democratic Party, holding the party leaders accountable to their own rules. That's created quite a shift in the party. And as I say, she joins us now. So Selina Vickers, first of all, welcome to the Zero Hour.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you. And I've got to say, I really admire your tenacity, number one. And number two, as someone who has ADD, I swear to God, Selina, I don't know how you did it. I don't know how year in and year out you just stuck with this thing and kept on fighting. Did you ever think, I'm just not going to get this done? There's no point in going on anymore?
Oh, yes. Yes, many times I would be 100% right on an issue and have evidence to support everything, and it would just get blown aside, and it was very, very frustrating. I'm not a big crier, but I've shed some tears plenty of times. It was a very frustrating time at times. And then there were a lot of highs and lows. There were a lot.
And what kept you going? I mean, I think somewhere in the Intercept article, you say you're not a big political party person, really, in a sense, I'm not either. Obviously, I've got things I believe in really strongly. What kept you going? What made you so determined to get this done?
Well, that's a really good question. And I think it just boils down to wanting to, I live in West Virginia. I've lived in West Virginia my whole life. And people suffer here, and the only way out of the suffering is through change in policy. And how do you get policy? Well, you have to have political power. How do you get political power? You have to use, in our two-party system, you have to use a political party. And in West Virginia, there was, up until June 18th, there was only one party. It was the Fossil Fuel Party and the Republican and Democratic factions. And, literally most major political decisions had to do with what was going to benefit the fossil fuel companies. And if we were going to change things for West Virginia, we had to change one of the two political parties. And for me, the one that was more aligned with my values was the Democratic Party. And so they were completely ineffective, in some ways quite harmful. And I I got involved through the 2016 Bernie Sanders campaign. That was sort of my entrance into political parties. And it was the first time that I realized that the political party that I was associated with intentionally did things that I viewed as harmful to people trying to affect change. And the goal of wanting to make things better for my state and the people in the state was the driver. But also, they just really pissed me off.
Yeah, you know what? It pissed me off too. I was working for Bernie Sanders that year, and as you know, he won West Virginia. But I got to tell you, it's I'm sure you do, and it really struck me working for him when we went to West Virginia, and I was writing for him, so I had to do a lot of research, prep him for the state, and of course I knew in a general way what was going on in West Virginia, but just how bad it is there, just to get a kind of a deeper sense of how badly people are suffering there really was kind of shocking to me. And it seems to me that politics in general has failed the people of West Virginia for a really long time. Yes. And whether it's the flooding that's been going on intermittently for so long, whether it's the pillaging or whatever you want to call it, the ruination of the land, whether it's which the flooding is of course a part of, whether it's the poverty, whether it's the inequality. I mean, of course, you could add much more to that than I ever could, but it is in fact really shocking. And I want to first of all just say I really admire your determination on all of this. You must have gone to a lot of meetings where people would just roll their eyes when you walked into the room and say, "Oh, there she is again," right?
Oh, many. You don't make any friends in this process, or any powerful friends. You make, in fact, a lot of enemies. And yes, there's, I was informed at one point I was considered the pest from the West, and I wear that with pride.
Yeah. Whereabouts in West Virginia are you from?
I live very close to the New River Gorge Bridge, where all the rafting is. I could walk to the bridge. Yeah.
So, but now you must have about 50 friends, right? At least.
Well, you do make friends from people who want the same thing. Who you hear stories about people who tried to get involved. They tried to go to a meeting, they got shut out. And they ran for office. They really had a good chance. They didn't get any help whatsoever from the state party or the county party. And those people, when they see that there is some potential to have a real party and a real political structure to win elections, yes. So, but the political power people, no, not a lot of friends there.
Well, let me ask you this. You mentioned that, you wanted to see change. You wanted to see the political system work for people there. And I think a lot of people around the country don't know, either never knew or have forgotten. There was a time that the Democratic Party, leaving aside what it did or didn't do for people, Virginia has not always been a red state by any means. It's been... Yeah, I'm sorry, excuse me, of course. West Virginia has not always been a red state. It was a Democratic state for a long time, turned Republican. Then you've had people who've kind of, your governor, if I recall correctly, ran as a Democrat and switched back to being a Republican once he won and so on. But it's not like it's unheard of to have Democrats elected in West Virginia. It just hasn't been the case recently. But it sure seems, with the exception of, your current Senator Joe Manchin, it sure seems like Democrats haven't had many chances to get elected lately, Joe Manchin aside. So now that the reforms that you've been pushing have gotten through and there's been a power shift in the Democratic Party, what are people saying? How do you guys think that you might be able to turn that into more electoral successes? What are people saying?
Well, that's a really, really good question. And I think it depends on who you ask. Some people, because of the redistricting, we just went through, the whole gerrymandering, the redistricting process like everybody else did. And some people feel that there are some districts that we have a really good chance in to get some seats in the House and the Senate. I am going to do my best to help people get elected, but at the same time, I'm just not as hopeful as I think some people are. I don't think we might win a few seats, but, and I'm glad we need to do that. But in my mind, it is like we are just now beginning to have a party. And you mentioned earlier, we used to be a blue state. We used to, all 5 of our statewide representatives were Democrats, but all of that has changed. But I think it's important for people to know that even when we were a solidly blue state, it was still run by fossil fuels. Okay. So, I mean, don't ever forget that. We had some good representatives. Jay Rockefeller, I love him. But fossil fuels always controlled the state. And so that's the big issue. I think of the way I look at this is the West Virginia Democratic Party is now being born, and all across the state, not only did people run for state, like Troy run for state executive committee, but also people ran for the county committees. And a lot of those county committees were basically nothing. Like they didn't even meet. They didn't do anything. They didn't work for their candidates. They didn't do anything that they were actually supposed to do. And all of that is beginning to change. There are a lot of vacancies that we're going to be working on, but I see us just now beginning to put together a party and build a party, to bring people who left the party because it did nothing. There's a lot. When I say a lot, I mean with a big old L, a lot of good old boy politics. The whole party system was just to, trade favors and things like that. Like that's going to take a while to root some of those people out. But I really see this as the beginning. And my hope is that we can just build from the ground up over the next few years, and maybe in 6 or 8 years, we can see real evidence of that in getting, a significant amount of people elected to, the House and the Senate. But we're going to start, we really need to start on municipality elections and different things like that. I mean, we have to literally build from the ground up.
I love that attitude, Selina Vickers. I think that's so much the way people have to be thinking nowadays, and don't. Everybody wants the quick wins, and obviously, things are desperate for people. So I understand that, but I think you got to kind of build from the farm league up to the majors. Sometimes I just think that's the way you got to do it. You got to have the long view. So I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think, there's a lot of discussion, or I've heard discussion, that what you guys have done in West Virginia, that maybe that could be exported to other states, because I talk to a lot of people who are activists around the country, and trust me, and I'm sure you know this, West Virginia is not the only state with good old boy Democratic politics. You want to come up to New York State, where I'm from, you'll see a lot of it there too, believe me. And the city where I was born, in upstate New York, was on the cover of Life magazine when I was a kid as Sin City, USA, the most corrupt town in America. So it's everywhere, right? Or in a lot of places. So, but there's a lot of talk that what you and your colleagues did in West Virginia might be a model for taking over state parties everywhere. What do you think of that idea?
Well, I think that there are different ways to do this. And like Nevada took over their Democratic Party. They just did that by, I mean, they kind of had a little bit different model than we did. And I'm friends with those people out there. I think that it really just depends on how people, like, what window of opportunity, what tools do you have to use? This is in no way whatsoever what I'm getting ready to say intended to be disrespectful to protesters, to activists. I think that all that is very, very important. I think people pushing from the outside is incredibly important. And I've done that. But for me, what the opening that I saw was through the rules process. And it's not sexy, and, you know, nobody comes, takes pictures of you while you're, you know, protesting or anything like that. You're just sitting in meetings for a very long time, learning the rules and spending lots of time in front of the computer, researching and writing and things like that. But I do think that it is a method that people can use. And what I would, and I don't know if this is the part where I could get very deep in the weeds, and I don't know how far you want me to go, but it's really, really important for somebody in that state, and it does not have to be a lawyer. Some people think it has to be a lawyer, and lawyers are great if they have time to do it. But you just need somebody who's willing to do a deep dive into the party bylaws, learn the DNC charter and bylaws. And I am a big critic of the DNC, but and I don't agree with everything they do, but like fundamentally, they have very good rules that call for, you know, inclusion of people, equal division between in gender, and they have good wording around inclusion with the LGBTQ community, transgender. I mean, they have very inclusive rules that they don't follow, and and that others and state parties don't follow, and they're supposed to, and they get away with it because, and that's what happened in West Virginia. They just, like, there was a rule. There's a rule that was passed in the original charter in 1974 that every state party is supposed to have an affirmative action plan to provide for representation of historically underrepresented groups that are somewhat proportional to how those groups participate in, you know, how they vote for Democrats. West Virginia never did it, just almost 50 years later, and nobody ever, you know, caught it. I mean, people would go, wow, there's a lot of white people on the state executive committee. But, you know, until we found the rule, which is, by the way, Charter Article 8, that has that, well, then what do you do with that? You know? And then so we started, how, now that I know this, what I do with it, how do you file a challenge? Well, the first challenge I filed, they dismissed outright because of one little bit of technicality. So I was very clear that the DNC was not at all interested in West Virginia following the rules. And it was, you know, I had to enlist some other help and different things like that, and continue to write challenges every time they did something they weren't supposed to do, or do something they weren't supposed to do. And I could document it and find somewhere in the rules what had happened. I would file a challenge, and I ended up filing a total of 9 challenges and numerous grievances. And it took a very long time, but finally the DNC agreed to, and they did it for a political reason, not because it was the right thing to do, but they agreed to have a memorandum of understanding and require the state to do some of the things that they were supposed to do, which that was then gave us the opportunity that we needed to make the changes that we did. But, you know, the bottom line is you have to understand how people are elected to party positions. You have to understand the rules around, inclusion, notice. There's a whole Article 2, Section 11 of the DNC bylaws. I love it. It's all about, making sure that people have full participation in the party. And I guarantee you, I would doubt if half of the states are doing what they're supposed to do. So I think it does give an opportunity for people who want to make change. And I also, and I'm going to stop talking in just a second. The other thing is I was a Bernie person, but I never went through this as I wanted a progressive. We had to have a progressive state party.
Right.
To me, I just wanted a fair state party where everybody, regardless of their political leanings, if they were Democrat, they had a fair opportunity to run for party office and to participate in the party. And I think that's important. I think, I think progressive ideals are great, but I think everybody should have a fair opportunity to run for party office and participate.
Yeah, I'm always saying, the branding, if you use that horrible word, is democratic, right? Small d democratic. So if you don't operate in a democratic way, what are you doing? So I completely agree with you. And so I've got to ask you, what's next for you? Because if you haven't decided yet, I have some ideas.
Well, okay. So in West Virginia, what I'm doing is I'm on my local county committee. We want to build our county committee. And there's sort of like a really interesting story about that, where the people that are the outgoing committee have conspired against us to try to keep us from having any power.
Right.
And so I filed a challenge, or I filed a grievance on that. And I really want to support our new chair and vice chair and help them. And I'm, I want people to consider me a resource for, the people who are building their counties, who run it. I mean, there are already people who are, trying to get something done in their county, and other people are not following the rules. Some of that is because they don't know the rules, and some of it may be intentional. I don't know. But so now it's a matter of making sure that we don't have a good old boy system, that we have an open and fair system. So I'm doing that. And then I still attend all the DNC Rules and Bylaws Committee, because having delegates to the National Convention is incredibly important. If anybody's listening, try to be a delegate, and not just a delegate that goes with, red, white, and blue clothes. Like, understand the rules, understand the purpose of the Democratic Convention, which is not just to nominate a nominee for president and vice president. It's also the most powerful supreme governing organization of the Democratic Party. And so resolutions and rules passed at that convention are critical, and we need good people who are going to be there through the whole thing and not go to all the parties. I mean, you go to parties, but you have to be there during certain times. Right. That's really important. So I'm going to be doing a lot of, education with people as I learn that the new delegate selection rules are getting ready to make those decisions in September. And anyway, I want a good and positive and inclusive Democratic Party from the ground all the way up to the National Convention. So however I can be of help in that process, I want to be. So, but I'm curious as what your idea is.
Well, I think you ought to be going to a few other states, even if it's by Zoom, if you don't want to get on an airplane, and giving them advice and guidance on how to do the same thing. And obviously the rules are going to vary a little bit from state to state, but you've learned the DNC rules too, and you've learned the general attitude and approach to take, giving them advice on how to take over the party as well. So I think
I'm glad to help anybody that wants help. And there's actually a group called PDPR, Progressive Democratic Party Reform, and that's sort of like their jam as well, And
you ought to connect with it. And I'll be thinking about it too, because I know people who are trying to do the same thing, PDA, and some of it I'll be thinking about it too. But people like me who are clinically incapable of doing that kind of work need people like you. So thank you for the wonderful work you've done. You've changed history in West Virginia, and so thank you for that. And thank you for coming on the program. Again, my guest has been Selina Vickers, who you can read about her in The Intercept. The headline is about Joe Manchin. The headline, I think, is, let me just see here, Senator Joe Manchin may not be kingmaker in West Virginia for long, but I don't think the story is really about Joe Manchin. I think the story is about the future of the Democratic Party and politics in West Virginia. So thanks for that work. And again, thanks for coming on the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
And we'll be right back after this. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour.